The sanctions program that's been put in place has definitely caused huge heartache in Russia. There's also been assets frozen from the Russian central bank. Banks have been banned from the capital markets. And so I would say that the sanctions program has been extremely tough. But there's one huge loophole, which is that while all these sanctions are in place, the West continues to buy Russian oil and gas. Russia sells between $500 million and $1 billion a day of oil to the West, and that money is used to progress their war in Ukraine. Well, the Russians are excellent at evading sanctions. They found intermediaries that help them evade sanctions. And so it's a game of cat and mouse. It's sort of whack-a-mole. We need to shut down all the different avenues of sanctions evasion. We need to find and sanction those people who are assisting them. And we need to continue to get smarter and smarter about all the different tricks and tools they use to try to get access to their money. But we're still living in a world where the United States will issue sanctions against an individual and let's say the EU won't, or the UK will and Canada won't. And so the first and most important thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a total conformity or uniformity of sanctions so that everybody works together on these sanctions. The second thing is that the sanctions program, even with the many people who've been sanctioned already, is still incomplete. There's only 40 Russian oligarchs sanctioned, and there's 118 Russian oligarchs on the Forbes list. In my opinion, all Russian oligarchs couldn't be oligarchs unless they did so with Putin's permission. They're effectively subordinates to Putin, and all of them should be sanctioned. And then, of course, we need to shut down the loopholes. We need to figure out the sanctions evaders. We need to apply secondary sanctions. And I think if we did that, it would continue to put the screws to Putin. It would continue to deprive him of his resources to fight this war. In my opinion, the war in Ukraine is totally driven by corruption in Russia. I estimate that over a 23-year period, Putin and about 1,000 people around him have stolen $1 trillion from the Russian state. That's money that should have been spent on hospitals and schools and roads and other public services. Instead, was spent on private jets in the West, yachts, villas, and other luxuries for a very small number of people. And Putin understood this, and he knew that effectively, if he did nothing, eventually the Russian people would come for him. And so what do you do if you're a dictator having stolen too much money from your own people? You find a foreign enemy and you start a war. And in my view, the war in Ukraine is a war of distraction, and the distraction is to distract Russian people from the terrible quality of life that they've been subjected to because all the money that could have contributed to a better life has been stolen by a small group of people. Well, as long as there's money, as long as there's wealth being created by corrupt and immoral individuals who are perpetrating terrible crimes, they're going to try to find ways of keeping that money safe. And it used to be that they would go and launder the money through Cyprus and Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Now those countries have become less hospitable, and so these people will be looking for other ways, maybe Bitcoin or art or Dubai or other places. But as the world wises up to this and creates tough conditions, then it becomes harder and harder for these people to put their money anywhere. Well, one of the most shocking stories is Switzerland. Switzerland doesn't conform with most sanctions programs. And we've seen a really shocking example of this in the Magnitsky case, the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. He had uncovered the theft of $230 million of government money by corrupt officials. And we found some of this money going to Switzerland. The Swiss authorities freeze that money about 11 years ago. It turns out that some of the people working on the investigation team received bribes. They were fired and prosecuted and found guilty, or at least one of them was, in a Swiss court. And in spite of that, they're planning on returning 80% of the money to the Russian perpetrators, even though those same Russian perpetrators are on the US, UK, Canadian, Australian, Latvian, and Estonian sanctions lists. And so the Swiss are really kind of neck deep in collusion with Russia. Well, sanctions are only effective in how well you enforce them, and so you need to enforce them better. You need to make sure that people can't circumnavigate them, but I think that's just a matter of time. Governments are just waking up to this problem. Before Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, there was very few people working on sanctions, and so I think it's just a matter of time before the programs become tougher and more properly enforced.